In the wilderness, you don't get to make two mistakes.
You need to come with us now, or you won't
I had been
survive.
driven there after losing everything. The men who arrived were a cruel reminder of my old life, all confidence and expensive gear. They saw a shortcut across the lake, a flat white sheet of ice that would save them 6 hours. But Duke, my Siberian Husky, he saw something else. He planted his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He sensed a grave beneath that ice. This dog was the only living thing that hadn't betrayed me. But the men were yelling. The money they offered wasn't just a bonus, it was survival. It was propane. It was food. I had 1 second to decide, trust the arrogance of the world I'd escaped, or the ancient silent warning of the animal who was my only future. The silence of the Denver high-rise was the loudest sound Leo had ever heard. It was the sound of an ending. Boxes, taped and labeled by professional movers he could no longer afford, lined the hallway of a life that was no longer his. Leo, a man in his mid-30s with the sharp, intelligent eyes of a designer and the worn-out flannel shirt of a man defeated, stood by the window. He used to look out at this skyline and see his own work reflected in the glass. Now he saw nothing. The betrayal had been precise. Marcus, his partner, the man who had been best man at his wedding, had dismantled his life, piece by legal piece. The fraud charges, the diverted funds, the fabricated emails. It was a masterpiece of destruction. Leo lost his license, his reputation, and every asset tied to his name. A low whine broke the sterile air. Duke, a 4-year-old Siberian Husky, pushed his head firmly against Leo's hand. Duke's coat was a thick, luxurious silver gray and white, and his eyes, a piercing, icy blue, held a knowing intelligence that unnerved most people. Right now, they held only concern. "It's just us, boy," Leo whispered, scratching the dog's ruff. The only things Marcus hadn't been able to touch were Leo's beat-up pickup truck and a forgotten piece of property in Wyoming, inherited from a reclusive uncle years ago. A dot on a map, a broken-down cabin with no running water. It was the only place left to go. They arrived in Wyoming under a bruised purple sky that promised snow. The cabin was worse than he remembered. It was a shack leaning against the wind with a few rotted planks for a porch. The cold was immediate, seeping through his thin city jacket. They needed supplies. Propane for the heater. Food. The only sign of life for 50 miles was a single-service gas station and general store. A sign swinging on one hinge read, "Bricks." The man behind the counter matched the name. He was large, built like a refrigerator, with a face that looked carved from hard-packed dirt. He was the law, and he knew it. "Need propane," Leo said, his voice quiet. Brick stared at Leo's clean hands and expensive, impractical boots. "That old cabin up on the ridge? Ain't nobody stayed there since 1999. A slow, humorless smile spread across his face. "Gonna be expensive, supply and demand." He named a price that made Leo's stomach clench. It was extortion. "And I'll need a tank delivered," Leo said. "Maybe tomorrow, if I remember," Brick said, turning his back. "You don't look like you'll last the night anyway, city boy." Leo learned his first lesson. He paid the inflated price for the groceries, swallowing the humiliation. That night, the temperature plummeted. Leo sat on the dusty floor of the cabin, shivering, the cold pressing in. Despair, a heavy, suffocating blanket, settled over him. Then Duke acted. The Husky whined, nudged Leo's stiff body, and then, with a heavy sigh, pressed his entire length against Leo's back, covering him in a living blanket of thick fur. Leo buried his face in the dog's neck, breathing in the scent of pine and loyalty. Duke was warm, Duke was real, and Duke needed to eat. Leo held the dog, the last anchor in his freefall. He would endure Brick. He would endure the cold. He would learn the new rules. Humiliation was a poor currency, but it was the only one Leo had to spend at Brick's store. Survival required cash. Leo found it in an ad pinned to the community board. Hiring seasonal maintenance crew, hard labor, no exceptions. The job was for a vast private conservation area bordering the national forest. The foreman, a man named Sal, looked Leo over with indifference. He had a face like tanned leather and hands that were permanently curled around the shape of a tool. "You work, you get paid. You slow us down, you're gone," Sal said, his voice flat. The crew was a collection of silent, hardened men. They respected only results. And then there was Grizzly. Grizzly was a large, sloppy man who seemed to take up too much space, all noise and rough edges. He drove the ATV too fast, hammered fence posts unevenly, and treated the equipment with contempt. He looked at Leo's architect soft hands and saw weakness. "Watch the city boy, fellas," Grizzly announced to the others, though they paid him no mind. Might break a nail. Leo said nothing. He learned to swing a sledgehammer. He learned to string barbed wire until his hands bled and then kept working. He learned the new law: do the work, endure the cold, and above all, be invisible. Duke stayed by the truck, a silent silver-gray shadow. His presence unnerved Grizzly, who hated the dog's intelligent, unwavering stare. The fight happened 2 weeks later. An early, vicious snowstorm blew in from the north, catching the crew miles from base camp. The wind howled, sharp and biting. They reached a small wooden bridge, crossing a deep, rocky ravine. It was their only way back. Grizzly, who had signed off on the bridge's inspection sheet the week before, waved the ATV forward. "It's fine, let's go." Leo stopped. Something was wrong. His architect's eye, trained to see stress points and structural integrity, caught it instantly. A main support joint was sagging. The lateral bracing was loose. Grizzly hadn't just been sloppy, he had lied. "Stop," Leo said. The command was quiet but absolute. Grizzly laughed. "What, city boy? Scared of a little snow?" As if to answer, a low growl rumbled deep in Duke's chest. The Husky planted his feet, refusing to move toward the bridge. "The joint's compromised," Leo said, pointing. "The weight of the ATV will create torsional stress. It won't hold." Sal, the foreman, looked from Leo to the bridge, then to Grizzly. Before Grizzly could argue, Leo was moving. He grabbed a heavy-duty winch chain from the truck. "If we anchor this chain to that pylon and loop it under the main beam, we can create a temporary tension support. It will transfer the load just long enough for us to cross." It was the language of physics, not brute force. Sal nodded. "Do it." They worked quickly, the metal clinking coldly in the storm. They crossed one by one. The bridge groaned but held. Back at the camp, Sal didn't raise his voice. He simply pointed toward the gate. "Grizzly, you're done. Your negligence almost killed us." Grizzly left, muttering curses. The next morning, Leo stepped out of his cabin into the biting cold. One of the crew members, a man who had never spoken a single word to him, walked past and shoved a steaming metal cup of coffee into his hand without making eye contact. Leo had earned his place. Duke, sensing the shift, sat proudly by the truck. He, too, was now part of the pack. Spring arrived in the Wyoming mountains with a deceptive softness. The biting winds gave way to warmer breezes, and patches of green dared to show through the retreating snow. Leo's contract with the conservation area ended. He still had the cabin, now surprisingly sturdy thanks to his architectural ingenuity and hard labor, but money was again tight. One sunny afternoon, a gleaming top-of-the-line SUV, far too clean for these roads, pulled up to his cabin. 3 figures emerged, looking wildly out of place. There was Corbin, a man with a meticulously trimmed beard and an air of entitled confidence, wearing designer hiking gear that had never seen mud. Beside him was Jenna, a woman whose fashionable sunglasses hid a calculating gaze, her phone perpetually in hand. Trailing behind them was Kyle, a nervous younger man, clearly uncomfortable, fidgeting with the straps of an oversized backpack. "Leo Vance?" Corbin asked, extending a manicured hand. "Heard you're the man to talk to about the lay of the land out here." Leo nodded warily. Duke, sensing the foreignness of these newcomers, stood close, a low rumble stirring in his chest. Corbin explained their plan, a luxury wilderness retreat, complete with glamping tents and artisanal foraging tours. They had a hefty budget and a desire to conquer the untouched beauty of Wyoming. Leo immediately sensed trouble. Their eyes sparkled with the naive arrogance of people who saw nature as a commodity, not a force. "We need you to guide us to the old Silver Creek mining claim," Jenna cut in, consulting her phone. "Our investors, they're very keen on this specific location." Leo's gut twisted. Silver Creek, that name. It was vaguely familiar. Marcus had once mentioned exploratory investments in remote land, unspoiled territories. A cold dread began to form. Could this be connected? He suppressed the thought. Money was money. He agreed, though a growing unease settled in. The next morning, the expedition began. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Corbin and Jenna packed an absurd amount of unnecessary gear, complained about every bump in the road, and treated their expensive equipment with a carelessness that made Leo cringe. Kyle, however, seemed genuinely interested in learning from Leo, quietly observing his methods. They approached the glacial lake, a vast, flat expanse of white that still held the lingering grip of winter. But under the warming sun, dark patches appeared, signaling weakness. "Okay, here's the plan," Corbin announced, pulling up a map on his tablet. "We cut straight across the lake. Saves us a 6-hour detour around." Leo frowned. "No, absolutely not. The ice is thinning. We're past the safe window. It could give way at any moment." Jenna scoffed. "Oh, come on. It's perfectly fine. My weather app says clear skies." "Your app doesn't know what 2 tons of SUV will do to 2 feet of melting ice," Leo retorted, his voice tight. "We go around." But Corbin was adamant, fueled by a mixture of impatience and overconfidence. "We're on a schedule, Vance. We're paying you to guide us, not to tell us what to do." Just as Corbin started the engine, Duke reacted. The Husky let out a series of sharp barks, a sound of urgent warning, then bit gently but firmly on the hem of Leo's pant leg, pulling him back. Duke then sat down, refusing to budge. His icy blue eyes were fixed on the lake, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. Leo looked at Duke, then at the melting ice. He knew the dog's instincts were infallible. "That's it," Leo declared, stepping away from the vehicle. "I'm out. I'm not risking my life, or my dog's, for your arrogance." Corbin cursed, but before he could argue further, Kyle, looking pale, also stepped out of the SUV. "I'm not going either. He's right." Corbin glared, then, with a frustrated roar, gunned the engine. "Fine. We don't need either of you." With a defiant peal of tires on the icy bank, Corbin drove the gleaming SUV onto the treacherous expanse of the lake. The crack of the ice was unmistakable, a thunderous sound that ripped across the vast lake. Leo and Kyle stood frozen, watching in horror as the gleaming SUV plunged into the frigid water. A desperate shout, then silence. Just then, a man on horseback, his face weathered and kind, galloped up to them. This was Elias Thorne, a rancher whose property bordered the lake. He wore a worn cowboy hat and had eyes that held the quiet wisdom of the mountains. "You boys all right?" Elias asked, his voice rough but gentle. "Saw that coming a mile off." Leo and Elias worked together, pulling Kyle to safety, though there was nothing they could do for Corbin and Jenna. The lake swallowed them whole. Elias took the 2 shaken men back to his ranch, a rambling, rustic collection of buildings nestled in a secluded valley. Life on Elias's ranch was a stark contrast to Leo's previous existence. There was no pretense, no rush, just the rhythm of the land. Leo worked tirelessly, helping Elias with the cattle, repairing fences, and mending barns. He found a strange peace in the physical labor, the quiet companionship of Elias, and the ever-present Duke. Duke, in turn, thrived. He would follow Elias as readily as Leo, a loyal shadow. The rancher would often speak to Duke as if the dog understood every word, sharing stories of the old days, of hard winters and faithful dogs. Leo saw the profound connection Elias had with the land and its creatures. One late spring evening, the sky, still unpredictable, opened up. A freak blizzard, unseasonable and violent, descended upon the valley. The wind howled through the eaves of the farmhouse, and snow piled up against the windows. Suddenly, Elias clutched his chest, his face paling. He gasped, falling to a chair. My heart. The medicine. At the ranger station, 5 miles over the ridge. Panic surged through Leo. The truck was useless. The snow was too deep. 5 miles over a mountain ridge in a blizzard. It was a death sentence, but Elias was fading. I'll go, Leo said, grabbing his thickest coat. You can't, son, Elias rasped. You'll never make it. Duke, sensing the urgency, whined softly, nudged Leo's hand, and then looked toward the door. His eyes, usually so calm, now burned with a fierce intensity. Leo nodded. He grabbed the small, tattered map Elias kept on the wall. His architect's mind, dormant for too long, snapped into focus. He traced contour lines, assessed prevailing wind directions, and visualized the shortest, safest path through the storm, avoiding potential snowdrifts and unstable slopes. He wouldn't just use brute force, he would use intellect. Come on, boy, Leo breathed to Duke. They set out, a man and his dog against the fury of the storm. The snow bit at Leo's face, blinding him. The wind pushed against him with immense force. He stumbled, falling more than once. But Duke was his compass. The Husky ran slightly ahead, his silver-gray coat almost invisible against the whiteout. He would stop, turn his head, and let out a soft whine, guiding Leo away from hidden crevasses and treacherous ice patches. When Leo faltered, Duke would nudge him forward, a warm, insistent pressure against his leg. 5 miles became an eternity. Every step was a battle. But the thought of Elias, the image of his kind, fading face, spurred Leo on. Finally, a faint light. The ranger station. Leo collapsed against the door, Duke collapsing beside him, both covered in snow and ice. He had made it. He had saved Elias. Back at the ranch, Elias, recovering slowly, looked at Leo with profound gratitude. You're more than a hired hand, Leo. You're family. A few weeks later, when Elias was strong enough, he took Leo to the small town's notary. Elias, who had no living relatives, presented Leo with a signed will. This ranch, it's yours now, son, all of it. Leo, for the first time in years, felt a deep, warm sense of belonging. The land, the life, the loyalty of Duke, and the love of Elias, it was a call he finally understood. Months turned into a year. Leo, the former Denver architect, was gone. In his place stood a man with sun-darkened skin, calloused hands, and eyes that held the quiet intensity of the wilderness. He managed Elias's ranch, his architectural mind now applied to mending fences, optimizing pasture rotation, and reinforcing the old barn against the harsh winters. He hunted for sustenance, not sport, and tracked game with the silent precision of a native. He and Duke were inseparable. They roamed the vast valleys and ridges, sometimes gone for days, living off the land, drinking from clear streams, and sleeping under a canopy of stars. Leo felt a connection to this place deeper than anything he'd known in the city. The call was no longer just an echo. It was the rhythm of his heart. One bleak autumn afternoon, as the first flakes of an early blizzard began to fall, an unfamiliar black SUV, gleaming even through the gathering gloom, pulled up the winding driveway. 2 figures emerged. One was Marcus, sharp-suited and looking utterly out of place, his face tight with a familiar calculating avarice. The other was Brick, the gas station owner, looking sullen but smug, wearing his usual dirty flannel. He held a rifle loosely in one hand. Marcus, still obsessed with expanding his portfolio, had discovered Leo's whereabouts through old property records, and knowing Leo had a stake in Elias's land, had hired Brick to guide and intimidate. "Leo," Marcus said, his voice smooth, a practiced mask of false concern. "Fancy meeting you here. We need to talk about that property and those documents you might still have." Leo stood his ground, Duke, a silent, silver-gray sentinel beside him, a low growl barely audible from his chest. "There's nothing to talk about, Marcus. This is my home now." Suddenly, Elias, frail but fierce, emerged from the farmhouse, leaning on his cane. "You two get off my land," he demanded, his voice trembling. Marcus's composure fractured. He raised a hand, dismissing the old man. "Stay out of this, old-timer." But Elias took another step. Marcus, frustrated and panicking, made a move for the rifle in Brick's hand. In the ensuing struggle, a shot rang out, loud and sharp. Elias stumbled backward, clutching his chest. He collapsed to the ground, his eyes wide, then fading. Silence fell, thick and heavy, broken only by the wind. Leo stared at Elias, then at Marcus, whose face was now a mask of terror. Brick, too, looked shocked, dropping the rifle into the snow. The last anchor connecting Leo to the world of humanity, the love of Elias, had been severed. A primal roar tore from Leo's throat. He launched himself at Marcus, a man utterly transformed. Marcus scrambled backward, tripping in the snow, his expensive suit no match for the elements. "Run!" Marcus screamed at Brick. Brick, terrified, fumbled with the keys to the SUV. He managed to start it, throwing it into reverse. But Duke was faster. With a burst of speed, the Husky streaked toward the vehicle. A ripping sound, then the metallic screech of a tire losing air. Duke had bitten clean through a rear tire. The SUV veered wildly, skidding into a snowdrift, its wheels spinning uselessly. Marcus, limping from a twisted ankle, crawled out of the vehicle. Brick, trapped, frantically tried to dig the tires free. The blizzard was intensifying, swallowing the valley in a swirling vortex of white. Leo walked toward them, Duke trotting silently beside him. Marcus looked up, fear turning his face ashen. "Please, Leo, help me. It was an accident." Brick, seeing Leo's implacable gaze, pleaded too. "Don't leave us, man." Leo picked up the rifle Marcus had dropped. He looked at both men, the architects of his pain, one who had destroyed his former life with cunning, the other who had tried to break his spirit with brute oppression. They were both broken now, at the mercy of the elements they had so arrogantly dismissed. He saw no pity, no anger, only cold understanding. He took the keys from the ignition of the stuck SUV and the cell phones from both men. Then, without a word, Leo turned his back. Duke followed, a silver-gray ghost disappearing into the swirling snow. Leo walked back to the farmhouse. He buried Elias with his own hands on a quiet knoll overlooking the valley. The ranch was truly his now. He was not just the owner, but the guardian. He and Duke, together, were the masters of this wild, untamed land. The greatest stories are not written in ink. They are written in paw prints, etched into our memories by a love that asks for nothing, yet gives us everything. It is the silent, unwavering loyalty that guides us home, even through the fiercest storm. We are a community that treasures these bonds. If you believe in this truth, we hope you will join our narrative by subscribing. Every story you share in the comments becomes a part of our collective journey. Please consider sharing this with someone who has been your faithful guide. The next chapter is already waiting for you right on the screen.